Hey boys and girls, today we are going to talk about a very interesting topic, the topic of using profanities, vulgarities or obscenities in the presence of or at a public servant in Singapore. There used to be a provision in the penal code. The penal code is the legislation, the law, which contains all the different criminal offences. There used to be a provision in the penal code for this offence, but a couple of years ago, it was deleted, and this offence is now covered under the Protection of Harassment Act. Section 6 of the Protection of Harassment Act, which I shall call POHA, provides that if you use any indecent, threatening, abusive or insulting words or behavior or communication towards or to a public servant or a public service worker, then you are liable to a fine not exceeding $5,000 or up to 12 months imprisonment. I'm going to give you a flavor of the kind of words that can get you a fine or even jail time. I will first discuss the public cases, and then I'll talk about my own personal cases that I have handled. Now I'm going to talk about the first case, the public case, public prosecutor and ACER. So while being handcuffed by the police officer, the accused shouted, "Hey, fuck you," repeatedly at the officer, repeatedly. He was sentenced to a fine of $4,000, in default of which is 4 weeks imprisonment. What does this mean? It simply means that if he doesn't pay the $4,000 fine, he goes to prison for 4 weeks. In the other public case of public prosecutor and Muhammad Khalid, there were 2 offences against 2 different police officers. He uttered the abusive words, "fuck you," repeatedly against both victims. So he was sentenced to a fine of $3,000 per charge, in default 2 weeks imprisonment per charge. So he had to pay a total fine of $6,000, and if he failed to do so, he would be fined, and if he failed to do so, he would have to spend 4 weeks in jail. The other public case is public prosecutor and Harvinder Singh, son of Pritam Singh. The accused was in a police vehicle on the way to the police station, and while in the police vehicle, he used abusive words in the Hokkien dialect and in the Malay language to the police officers. He was sentenced to 1 month's jail for the following reasons. He had a lack of genuine remorse during the sentencing hearing, and he had previous convictions for the similar offences, which is essentially misconduct in public. Now, I'm going to talk about the cases that I have personally handled. The first case, the accused was driving a car across to Malaysia at the causeway, the bridge to Malaysia. He was on the Singapore side, and there were all these attendants, ICA officer, immigration officers who had to check the passports of the people in the vehicles who are going across the bridge. So the immigration officer told him to wind down the back window because he wanted to see some kind of sunscreen or something. And because of the position of the car, the accused was not able to wind down the window or take down the sunshade. So the immigration officer told him not to argue with her. So in exasperation, the accused said, "What the fuck? Bloody sergeant, why is she behaving like that? I want to see the supervisor or manager." So I repeat, he used the words, "what the fuck." He didn't say "fuck you." And he was arrested and charged. So during the initial process where the lawyer has to write representations to the court, I actually explained to the public prosecutor that the meaning of the words "what the fuck" is not being directed at the immigration officer. the meaning of that phrase essentially is uttered in frustration or exasperation at the surrounding circumstances. And in court, during the sentencing hearing, when I was doing the mitigation plea, basically to ask for a lower sentence, I explained to the judge the meaning of the words, that it was uttered in exasperation, in frustration at the at the situation, and not at the immigration officer. But the judge refused to buy it. The judge said that it's qualifying the plea, and I had to delete those parts. So in the end, he was sentenced to a fine of 3,500 Singapore dollars for using the words "what the fuck" in front of an immigration officer. The next case that I've personally defended involved a man who committed the offences while he was drunk. He was charged with 12 different charges, all committed when he was drunk. Under Singapore law, being drunk is not a defense or an excuse for a criminal offense. He was sentenced to a total of 21 weeks jail and $5,500 fine. Let me give you the details of his offenses. His wife had taken out a personal protection order against him. So in breach of this personal protection order, he called her, he scolded her names such as "fuck you," "bloody bitch," and in breach of the personal protection order, they also charged him under POHA, Protection of Harassment Act, for the same offense. "Don't let me hit you with this beer bottle." He uttered it on 2 occasions. He was drunk. He held the beer bottle and said, "Don't let me hit you with this beer bottle." So for these 2 offenses, he was fined $4,000 and sentenced to 6 weeks jail for breach of the PPO and for uttering the words under POHA to cause alarm and anxiety. On certain occasions, he also said "fuck you" several times to one police sergeant. On another occasion, he used the words "nabe chibai chinakui" to another police sergeant, a different one. This basically means "your mother's cunt," and he was sentenced to 3 weeks jail for this offense. One of the other offenses that this same person was charged with was uttering the words "you Muslim Malay, don't touch my Indian things, nabe chibai. You are Muslim, don't bomb here. Your color, don't touch my Indian things," and "Muslim fucker" to the 3rd police sergeant. For this offense, he was sentenced to a fine of 1,500. As some of you may know, racism is very sensitive in Singapore. So when you utter things that are racially sensitive, you are likely to be punished more. He was also sentenced for another offense for shouting at police officers, this time without using profanities. He was just shouting incoherently while drunk. He got 3 weeks for that offense. He was also charged for spitting at a police officer. His version of the events was that he was handcuffed, and while being coming up from a prone position, his saliva dripped down his mouth. But the public prosecutor didn't believe that, and he was charged for spitting at the police officer. For the spitting charge, he was sentenced to 12 weeks jail. So he was sentenced to a total of 5 months and $5,500 for all the offenses. So the take home today is never utter any obscene or insulting words in front of a government or a public servant. Thanks for watching this video.